Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, a special deep dive episode that we record exclusively for our Patreons and our Academates on the Bestseller Academy. And before we slip under the covers of this episode, first a quick warning. Today's deep dive is all about writing sex scenes, so we will no doubt be using full and fruity language today. So if that's not your bag, then switch off now and we'll see you next time. That's it. Off you pop. Have they gone? Splendid. I am delighted to be joined today by Caedis Knight, author of the wonderful Blood Web Chronicles, Sirens of Los Angeles, Vampires of Moscow, and Witches of Barcelona. And Caedis Knight is in fact two writers collaborating, Jacqueline, Silvester, and N.J. Simmonds. Welcome to the podcast, both of you. How are you today?
Fantastic. What a great introduction, Mark. Thank you.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. So, before we start, let's be clear. We're not talking about erotica today. We're talking about interpolating scenes of a sexual nature into fiction. And that's something you do with the Blood Web Chronicles, isn't it?
That's right. Yes.
Excellent stuff.
Paranormal romance with erotic elements.
Excellent stuff. So tell us about yourselves. How did you two start working together?
It started, well, actually, I met Jackie at YALC, which is the Young Adult Literary Convention. We were both there with our books back in 2017. And I remember her being a really bubbly, vivacious person. We got chatting, we became friends, you know what it's like with author friends and sharing our ups and downs. And in 2019, I think it was in October, she rang me. And I'll never forget this call, actually, because I was in my office and she said, "Oh, this is a bit weird and you can say no if you want to, but I was just thinking, how would you like to write some paranormal romance books with me? I've had an idea." And I mean, she hadn't even finished her sentence before I was like, "Oh my God, yes, let's just do it." We didn't even think about getting an agent for it or, you know, getting public. I've already, you know, traditionally published. We knew straight away we were going to self-publish it because we wanted full control. Jackie already had some fab ideas for the direction that the series was going to go in. And we just went for it. And as I say, the rest is history. And we didn't know that was 3 or 4 months before a pandemic was going to hit. But luckily for us, it's kind of helped us survive the toughest year we've all had. There you go, Jackie, you can carry on now. I won't take over.
I was watching, I was already a hybrid indie author, so I have some foreign rights deals, and then I self-published my YA trilogy. And I was watching all these people do really well with this fun, exciting paranormal romance, quick release series. And I was like, I would love to do this, but it's already so isolating being in this job. And I was like, it would be so cool. And I saw a few people co-writing successfully as well. And I was like, it would be so cool to do that with someone. And Natalie and I were just getting to know each other. And then I pitched it to her and I was nervous. And yeah, she said yes. And we started, I think, 3 weeks later or something.
We just went for it, didn't we? And it was funny because we were talking the other day and Jackie said, "Do you know how many people just wouldn't have got this far?" Because our first book, Vampires of Moscow, came out so a year after our idea, really, and in October 2020. And since then, we've got 2 books and a novella from a 6-book series out. Plus, we've got a foreign rights agent, and we've just sold to AST in Russia, which is one of the biggest traditional publishers in Moscow. And we were like, that's only 7 months since our first book came out. Like we've done quite a lot, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire for us because we just went for it, didn't we?
Wonderful stuff. Okay, well, look, I'd like to maybe circle back to collaboration later on because we're always interested in how writers collaborate together and their methods. But let's jump in because we have some listener questions. But first of all, I would like to ask, why do we have sex scenes? What purpose do they serve? Certainly in your novels, what purpose do they serve?
We try to make them progress the plot and we'll talk later about this, we try to add a lot of characterization to the sex scene so that it is developing the characters and developing the relationship, developing the plot. So we definitely try to use it as a literary device, but it is also there for fun and because people want it. So, you know, same reason it's in the movies, people want it. We want to write it. So there's a big supply and demand there.
Yeah, and it's also the genre. You know, it's paranormal romance. It's expected. There's no surprises there. It's marketed. It's written to market. It's marketed as 18 plus adult. books, so we're not going to take our readers through a romantic journey and fade out. They want to go all the way with us, as it were. So and as Jackie was saying, it's rising. We're not doing the 50 Shades thing here, although that did highlight the fact that a lot of women wanted more sex in their books. But we really wanted to write sex from the female gaze, positive sexual representation for women by women. And that was so important to us. So that's why we write it.
Fantastic. First listener question is from Chris Day, who is my cousin. Who is a writer. So these aren't all going to be from my family. I just want to make that clear. But Chris says, is it better to leave more to the reader's imagination than going into any detail? And I guess this is the great debate, isn't it? Do you go, I mean, I guess with some hardcore erotica, you are, showing all the detail, but where do you stand on this?
I think there's really, in general, when it comes to sex scenes, there is no right or wrong, because it's really, you know how they say, like, don't shame someone else's kink or whatever. With paranormal romance, you've got subdivisions of genres that are very explicit, less explicit. You've got authors that have floral prose, so the sex is going to be kind of floral prose, and then people will seek that out. And then, of course, you have erotic fiction, BDSM fiction. You have all these subgenres that people will seek out, and they'll expect a certain, level of explicitity in that. So it has to do with the genre, with your own voice, and people's preferences. But there's no right or wrong, because there's so many. It's such a giant blossoming industry now. There's so many subgenres where readers have separate expectations for all the subgenres.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're going to write for a specific audience and it's quite chaste and it's not expected, then don't just stick some lewd sex scene in there for titillation, because it's just going to stand out. The same as anything would. The same as you wouldn't have a big fight scene when you're writing a rom-com, or maybe you would, but maybe you'd write it differently. So it's all about your audience, how you've marketed your books, expectations, and relevance. It shouldn't be kind of just stuck in there for the sake of it.
Yeah, I had a sex scene in a YA novel that I wrote, and it was very toned down. Like, it just alludes to the fact that these characters, have been together, because obviously if you were to be explicit in YA, that's a bit strange. I mean, there are authors that have done that. In paranormal romance also, usually it's in the descriptors of the book, so people know what they're seeking out and what they like. So we have, what is it, clean romance it's called right now?
Yeah, there is clean romance, there's Christian romance.
It's a lot of subdivisions.
Exactly.
So what the indie world has done is open the door for all these many subdivisions that didn't have room, or subgenres where there was no room on the market for them, because they were maybe a little bit niche when it came to one country, but when it came to the global worlds, there were a lot of people looking for that type of tame Christian romance or explicit shifter romance, and so you have a lot of those.
And our blurbs say like wickedly sinful or full of lust and passion. We're not hiding anything, so you know what you're going to get.
Excellent stuff. You mentioned floral prose there, and we've got some questions on language in a minute, so we'll come back to that as well. I've got a question from Julian Barr here, and Julian says, what are your top tips for making a sex scene move your story forward? He says a bad sex scene in a movie is like an ad break. Same goes for an action sequence. And you mentioned, gratuitous action sequences earlier. So what are the good tips for making a sex scene actually make a contribution to story and character?
It's all to do with pacing, isn't it? So as Jackie said earlier, our sex scenes aren't in there just for the sake of it. They alluded to right from the very beginning. We were talking about it yesterday. We actually don't have the big kind of sex scene until about 75% of the way through the story. Our books are very plot and character driven. Each book is an individual plot, but it's a series, so there's a story running across all of them. So our readers are invested in the story and the characters much more than they are in the will they, won't they, bonk at the end. But by the time they do, it's such a slow build that it's a natural conclusion, and that is part of the pacing. A lot of the times as well that we bring in their characters. So, if you're going to have a shy and timid character, then you're not going to have the same sex scene as you are if someone's really, gregarious or cheeky or naughty or controlling, and so that's why the sex in the books really does have to reflect the story as a whole. If the book works without that sex scene, it shouldn't be in there. That's what it boils down to, really.
Yeah, I think it also, for us, boils down to we are writing romance, so it can't feel as a ad break because people are there for the romance. So if you build properly to it, then the reader will hopefully feel something by the time it gets to that point, and then they're rooting for them and they're excited. The most important thing is lacing it with characterization. That's when it doesn't feel like it just got stuck in. I think you see this a lot in Game of Thrones. There's so many sex scenes, but each one is full of characterization and stuff. And so if they give a villain a sex scene, they're still gonna, even if he's enjoying it, the villain, they're still gonna show cruelty or whatever they need to, deepen the characterization on that.
Yeah.
And of course, Game of Thrones gave us the phrase sexposition, which is where it was a great way to slip exposition into a scene, because you'd be so distracted by the sex you didn't realize you were just being fed really quite clunky exposition as part of this. So that can help you too, listeners.
Yeah, well, I'm mostly talking about the show because I've only read one of the books. Don't kill me, anybody listening. But I remember sort of with Joffrey, I always expected that each sex scene was just going to be something horrible, him doing something horrible. And then there was one where it was actually, I think, okay, but then they were doing something horrible together. And it would always paint, the character and just deepen that on screen. Or you have Jon Snow being like super timid and stuff like that when he finally got with Ygritte. So.
Yeah, and still learning, it was all very much like he may be the hero, but he's also really innocent. I mean, for instance, with Vampires of Moscow, we've got two brothers and you never know who she's going to end up with, or which one's a good guy and which one's not. And the relationships she has with them are completely different. One of them's very controlling. So what they get up to is a very kind of slowly paced, slow build, controlling situation. Whereas when she ends up with the other crazy, really bonkers brother, then they are up to crazy stuff. And that's what keeps the readers from skipping over it, because it's still part of getting to know the characters.
Yeah. And we had a moment in Witches of Barcelona where we had already written this really exciting sex scene, but then we said, our protagonist is placing a lot of trust in this scene. And we're like, but the other person hasn't earned this trust. So we had to go back and write in the little micro scenes where she would earn her trust in order to make that believable. Because obviously you're building up like a pre-existing, and you get short erotica where obviously two people have just met and then it's just all about the erotica, and that's a genre. But here we have to build all of it.
Yeah, because she's, our main character is bisexual and she's pretty promiscuous, but none of the sex is for no reason. She builds relationships with people because maybe, she's trying to compensate for other things, or through friendship or through excitement, or whatever the theme of that story is. So we don't just have her going around just shagging people like James Bond, hopefully.
Well, the way James Bond operates tells you a lot about him as well, doesn't it? I mean, this is
that is also true. Actually, that is very much down to him, isn't it?
These scenes are very often intimate, and they show characters at either their most vulnerable, or they can show a dark side as well. So, I mean, that really can be. I mean, if you use these sex scenes properly, they can be some of the most pivotal scenes in a book, can't they, in the story?
Yeah, and for us, it's important to remember the paranormal aspect as well. So we make sure that all encompasses what powers do they have, how would they be using them, how would that interlace, with the sex and stuff, because that's important. Because if you had powers, and I like... in True Blood, I like how it opens up with like vampire sex at the start, and you see like how these people, are using their abilities in the bedroom and stuff. And that's also interesting characterization. And you see it in The Boys, which Natalie and I are big fans of. I don't know if you've seen The Boys. Have you seen it? Yeah. When they have the superhero horrible sex at the end, you're like, okay, you're both evil, and that's clearly going into this moment with both of you.
Yeah, we really are inspired by a lot of fantasy, superhero, horror, supernatural TV as well. We're very visual people, and Jackie's background's TV as well. So we love watching series together, for inspiration, and to see how they bring, especially sex as well, how they bring that into the storyline.
You mentioned True Blood there. I used to work at Orion when we published Charlene Harris and when the TV show started. And they said, everyone gather in the boardroom. We're going to watch the opening episode of True Blood together. And you know that thing when you're growing up and you watch sex scenes and your parents are sitting there and you're like, oh my God, I can't. It was that times 100, especially the opening scene, which people will remember.
It starts with a bang, literally.
Really does. Really, really does. So yeah, that will always be imprinted into my brain. And I sometimes wake at night screaming. We got some questions on language here from our listeners. And they had some really fun questions here. So Lucy Masters says, how do you learn to avoid coy euphemisms like his throbbing rod and her mound? I mean, the language around sex scenes, there are a lot of cliches and pitfalls, aren't there? How do you avoid these?
I think cliches exist for a reason, and it means, a certain audience did enjoy them, perhaps continues to enjoy them. So I think if you are writing kind of old school romance, and if you're writing gentle romance as well, you're maybe not going to be like, dick and vagina. You're maybe going to gravitate towards the other words. Or if you're writing medieval type of fantasy, you're not going to use the harsher modern words. You're going to want to use those euphemisms. I think we use a mix because it also does feel crass sometimes to just use the exact words over and over again. And you're referring to these body parts again and again. So it's also going to get kind of, repetitive. And
it's not romantic, is it? And everybody knows what's going to go in where. So you don't have to keep kind of...
Yeah. But there is a challenge. I would not judge people for using, any kind of euphemisms. There's a challenge. And also working in co-authorship, we found that different words turn different people off, So I'll say, well, how about this phrase? And now they're like, no. And I'm like, then she'll write a phrase and I'll be like, oh, I really don't like that, please. And so we see a lot of that. Yeah.
I think that's where co-writing is a definite advantage, because if you were just left to perhaps your own devices, you haven't got someone there challenging you, going, actually, this could be problematic, or this makes me cringe, or this puts me off. Do you guys have a lot of that when you're working together?
Yeah, it's funny because I don't know if it's from our background. I mean, Jackie's got Russian parentage, I've got Spanish parentage, and they're not as British as others. So we're very much like, that's crap, take it out. Okay, fine. Or I rewrote your chapter, it didn't work. Okay, fine. You can't be polite about it. Otherwise you're going to get nowhere. You're going to be a whole year discussing, well, do you mind if that's okay? So whether it's a sex scene or any other kind of scene, we're very blunt with one another. And it is funny. And, our husbands do laugh that we'll be sitting up waiting for the other one to send the chapter. And it's like, what are you waiting for? Jackie's taking a sex scene. I've got to read it before bed. It's not what most co-workers do for one another. But it's great because like with Witches of Barcelona, because it was two women, we really wanted to get it right. And we wrote it. And then Jackie's like, the pacing's not great. And I enjoy kind of pacing and slow, so I slowed it down a bit, and then Jackie went back in there, put more characterization, and in the end we ended up with this chapter that some of our writers said was the best. One reader said it was the best romance scene she'd read all year. We're like, oh, thank God for that, because it took us how many goes back and forth to get it right.
We felt a lot of pressure on that one. So
yeah, and it ended up being incredibly romantic but also sexy. And it might sound, a bit awkward, especially when you're writing with a friend, but it has to turn you on. If you're writing something and it doesn't put you in the mood, or you wouldn't fancy that happening to you, then your readers aren't going to react either. And it doesn't matter whether you're trying to make someone cry or laugh or out of breath with excitement because of an action scene or a little bit horny. I mean, you're still writing emotion. It has to work.
Wonderful stuff. Denise McGahn asks, how do you avoid the cliches and the cringe factor? She says, I'm writing a sex scene between two unlikely characters, and anything too graphic or mainstream feels out of character. Now, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but how do you judge what the cringe factor might be?
I think ultimately it's your art, so you're going to know what makes you cringe, and you're not going to put something in that makes you already cringe. It's likely to make other people cringe. I think you can avoid it. I think don't force it. For us, it's really fun writing sex scenes. We really enjoy it. So there's no forcing because we felt like we had to have them. If you're forcing it, then try something that doesn't feel forced for you. So maybe describing what's happening in the room, or, in a TV series, they'll pan the camera to the bed knocking, very slowly against the wall. And then you're like, oh, this is boring and terrible. There's no sound, there's just silence and the pounding bed. Or they'll make the bed pound so crazily, the building's shaking. Or they'll show the neighbors who can feel, how crazily the bed is shaking. So maybe play with other things that do feel more comfortable to you, or the dialogue of the two characters post the event. But like we said, in our genre, it's expected to be, 5 to 6, 7 pages of that happening.
Yeah, and it's not just sex that gets to be sexy. You can make something really that's not sexual feel sexy. You can have her watching him eat a slice of pizza, and the way it's described, or the way he's looking at her, or the way she's dropping her fork because she's obviously realized she's in love with him. That itself can also have the same reaction as a well-written sex scene. And other sex scenes can leave you completely flat. So you might as well just write the pizza scene, You're trying to evoke emotion. It's not about just, they get into bed, they take their clothes off, this happens. We all know what sex looks like. So you have to engage a lot more of the emotion.
Yeah, and you can convey things by did the character keep a nightgown on because they weren't even that keen on it? Or is the character smoking afterwards, or out on the balcony in the nude or something like that? I feel like it depends completely on how the voice already sounds. I really loved Mad Men, but I feel like in Mad Men, an explicit sex scene would have been whoa, you're taking me out of that. But they show a lot of people lighting the cigarette and things to show how it was.
Yeah, he's so controlled. He's not going to suddenly be swinging off the chandeliers. So it's just a continuation. Yeah.
Excellent stuff. We mentioned floral prose earlier, and Gavin Ralph has a question, and I think he's just sent this because he wants to hear me say these words on the podcast. But he says, why are such flowery sexual euphemisms so often used? Is it what readers expect? And he says some of the worst offenders that spring to mind: tumescence, member, honeypot, love canal, intimate folds. I hope you're happy now, Gavin. So, you mentioned floral prose earlier on. Again, that's just really horses for courses, isn't it? It's where the tone is appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, when we were writing the love scene between two women, we were just like, wow, we have the same genitals twice here. We don't even have to describe a penis. So how many different ways are we going to do that? We know what they're doing, but a lot of the times you don't even have to describe, the vulva or the vagina. We know what she's doing. If she's get down on her knees and she's grabbing her, from behind her thighs or something, we know exactly what she's doing. You don't have to then describe each genitalia in any kind of detail. You can describe the actions. Yeah,
it is a struggle, though. So when you see those euphemisms and stuff, just know that it is a struggle, because if people are expecting this sex scene and then the action is escalating and you've got interior beats in the scene and stuff, and then you have to still refer back to what they're doing. And, you can't just be vagina, 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 50 times on a page. That's not going to work. But then you're also we had to actually look up all the different ways. And then we would try one, honeypot wouldn't work. I'd be like, oh no. But member, you see that so much in fantasy romance. That's not even a rare one at all. Mm-hmm. And I also think it depends on which part in the scene you are. I've noticed authors get more explicit as you're getting closer, so you've warmed up the person. But I think in fantasy, they'll use those words to later get to the more explicit. You'll keep the explicit ones for later, because if you just go swinging right away with the most
then it becomes vulgar. Yeah. I mean, Sarah J. Maas went in with the velvet wrapped steel, which we still think is a winner. we didn't velvet wrap steel, but at the beginning you're just talking about the actions and how they're both feeling, and you have to kind of take your reader out of the action a little bit and remember that there's a lot of inner dialogue going on and stuff going on around them, so that your pacing's right. But yeah, it depends. At the end, it does get a little bit graphic, because at that point you expect them both to be really into it, and then you can go a bit bit dirty.
We definitely have some where we've just gone no, and then it's just a gut feeling. We were trying to, obviously nipples came up a lot, and then I read somewhere peaked mounds, and I was like, Natalie, peaked mounds? How does that work? And she was like, no, I don't like that. I was like, I think it's okay, maybe, and I don't know if we did end up.
I don't know, did we have a peaked mound? I think. Did we use nubs for nipples? I don't remember anymore. It was hilarious because we turned to our husbands. We was like, what should we say? And they came out with the most horrific stuff. The worst. Quite disturbing. Like, you need to. Yeah. How is that even in your vocabulary? What are you watching? And so then we knew what words.
Can't you just say gash in the?
Gash. There was. I think they were doing it to wind us up. But anyway, we did put in the acknowledgements. Thanks for all the words we're now definitely never going to use.
Thanks for zero help. I remember now that we saw that a few romance authors were using the word. Wasn't it like pebbled as a verb? Right? Like
and I was like, you can't, unless it's like pebble dashing a house.
You're like, that's not proper grammar. Nothing's going to be pebbling.
I don't think her nipples can pebble. And I was like, that doesn't make sense. I know people are trying to be creative here, but let's still stick to something.
Anyway, that's. I hope that answers the euphemism
question. There are no rules.
Sorry, Mark.
The other thing is it needs to travel as well. It needs to meet, because you're writing for an international audience, and I remember when I was a bookseller, I ran a section where we had the Nancy Friday books, and, of course, you'd pick them up and read them. And they were always referring to Peter. And I was like, what? Who is this Peter? Oh, they mean that. Oh, okay. Oh, what? So there is.
For William Fanny, it probably wouldn't translate either.
No, well, that's the thing. I mean, some terms will be old-fashioned. They might not mean anything to a younger generation, and some of these terms just might not travel internationally. Is that something that you're aware of?
We try not to. Well, yes, because we write for an American market. So, and I'm obviously, I'm British, I'm from London. So sometimes Jackie would be like, that's an Anglicism. That doesn't even make sense.
Well, I de-Anglicize everything at the end. So it's one of our more final steps, because I also lived in the UK for 8 years. So sometimes I won't even notice. So I'll run it through like a processor, like Grammarly for Anglicisms. And then I'll start to notice like, oh, okay, no, we can't have that. So we do write, our character speaks to herself and to others in American English, but it's complex because one of her magical gifts is she can speak every language that there is in the world. And then she's also visiting different places in Europe. So we speak the languages of most of the places that she's visiting. So we keep that in mind, as well as that she's thinking in the natural language of where she is, and that the reader is then American after that. So sometimes it's like, oh my God.
We make it so hard for ourselves because Jackie and I have lived in, I don't know how many, 12 countries between us. We speak 5 or 6 languages, and that's what we wanted to bring, that kind of immigrant feel to the books. And I think that's what makes them kind of unique, because each one's in a different city, like Jackie said. But yes, we made it so complicated for our poor American audio narrator, the actress, because we realized that we just had like so many words in there that weren't English. And we were like,
we ended up kind of canceling accents for the audiobook and making them just subtleties. So we're like, just subtly lean into each person, because it was so distracting. Like you've got like in the Russia book. So my parents are from Moscow, and I wanted there to be more diversity in showing Moscow, because Moscow is actually like Kazakhstani people, Tajikistani people, Georgians, and we have everyone in there. And then our poor audio narrator was just like, oh my God, like I don't know what a Kazakhstani accent is in Russian being interpreted by, well, because Kazakhs speak Russian, but like a Georgian influence over the way this character's speaking. And we're like, just
let it go. Let it go.
Subtle. A subtle thing.
Otherwise, it's going to be like a really bad radio play. Like, no.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay, excellent stuff. I've got some questions on pace and tempo now. Lucy Masters says, there's a saying, less is more, but how do you know when to tone it down or dial it up? And how do you maintain the tempo without losing potency and credibility? Now, Natalie, you've mentioned pace quite a few times in this conversation. So yeah, when to tone it down and dial it up?
I love working with pace, because for me, I like the idea of the reader kind of literally being out of breath, and you can do that with the the sentence structures, whether it's a long sentence, a short sentence, a sharp one, the words you use, the alliteration, it makes you kind of breathe differently. And if you've got an action scene or a sex scene, you literally want their breathing to change. You want their body to be reacting to what they're reading. So it's really important that your sex scenes aren't too slow and aren't too fast, I guess, like real life sex or any other action thing. So we tend to decide what's going to happen and where it's going to happen, who's going to do it and how. And then because there's two of us, we're able to go back and forward. And often it will be too fast because as a writer, you just kind of want to get to the next stage, don't you? And then we'll go back and we'll slow it down. And that's when we'll be like, okay, let's take them out of the action for a moment. Let's have some inner dialogue. What's happening around them? You know, if you're having sex outdoors, there's still, you're not in a static bedroom. There's things going on. If you're in a wood, well, what can they hear? What can they see? Are there leaves falling? How can you create, metaphors or visual stimuli that reflects how they're feeling? So yeah, that's very important. Jackie, did you want to add anything to pacing?
I agree with you. We sort of we tend to put the bones down first. And so we just have who's going to be doing what and where will they be and how's it kind of dynamically body-wise going to function. Then we're going to layer that with some characterization, the environment surrounding them, and then we'll finish it off by polishing it with like maybe phrases said in other languages, a little bit of added characterization, more environment stuff happening around them. And yeah, then, but as again, with right and wrong, I think when people ask those type of things, they don't know that there's so many, again, subgenres where right and wrong is very different. So it really depends on your own comfort, on what type of tone you've already created, in the book. And it needs to match that. And then it needs to match lengthwise. You're not going to go into a genre that doesn't expect sex with your 60,000 K novel and have a 10-page sex scene. You're just not, because it's not, it doesn't work that way. So it really has to do with genre, tone, and then you can decide on pacing, what kind of pacing and maintain the pacing you've had thus far as well.
But I mean, you make me laugh because when Jackie was saying like what goes where, Jackie lives in Berlin, I live in the Netherlands, but she did come and visit for 10 days because Corona hasn't helped. We were originally going to be with each other much more often. So when she was at my house for 10 days, we were really working on Vampires of Moscow scene. And because you're two people writing, but you don't share a brain. So I was like, well, I don't understand, like, how are we building this up? She said, well, Saskia's sitting in a wheelie chair and he pulls her by the back of her knees. So she's like, okay, Natalie, sit on the chair. Come here and I'll show you. I mean, it didn't get much more lewd than that, but it was like, and then she said,
okay, so spin her, because it's this character that has like wild abandon, and then this girl sitting on a chair, and I wanted him to kind of be like playful and wild with like, he's talking to her, but he's kind of like spinning her around. Yeah. And we tried, and it wasn't like really, I couldn't manipulate the chair in that way, but I was like, oh, he has vampire strength. It's fine.
So, where are his hands going to be? And it was quite funny, but we didn't go much further than that, But sometimes it's hard. Like when I write action scenes, I get the kids to play it out so I can figure out. But when you're writing sex scenes, you're like, okay, you don't quite want to be like taking notes while you're having sex in real life. Going, wait, his hand's there. That means my hand can't reach there, But it is on your mind a bit.
That must happen. You must be. Hang on. Can we just stop for a minute so I can just write this down?
I'm not going to pretend that I'm not slightly aware at times that I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Actually, if I'm doing this, then from his point of view, that must look, sometimes you do. You can't help it. Don't tell my husband. He won't let him listen.
You mentioned earlier something about a 10-page sex scene. I mean, Gavin Ralphs has a question here. How do you strike the right balance, giving the reader enough to make the scene worthwhile, but not so much they want to hurry up and get on with things? Is there such a thing as the perfect length for a sex scene? Is it something that you consider as part of the pacing and tempo?
I think it depends on what your readers, if you already have an existing body of work, what they expect. I don't know. We are kind of designing our series around our readers. So we have a street team that people can join and they can say what they want more of. I'm not sure we've had anyone say really longer sex or anything like that, but if they did, we would include more of it.
They did at the beginning when we first had some beta readers with Sirens of Los Angeles, which is our kind of our reader magnet, and it's a short novella. We did have a reader like, oh, the sex was actually quite kind of quick. I'm like, oh, that's a good point, actually, because it's a novella, you really have got a lot to kind of fit in there. And we didn't spend a lot of time on the sex, and we did kind of pace it better, and it worked in there.
And
so yeah,
with Sarah J. Maas, for example, who's so huge in the romance sector, she had sort of light sex scenes, and then she really got known for her sex scenes, and people really wanted that. But she still had, I'd say, like 1 or 2 a book with her middle trilogy. And then I just read her most recent book, and it is literally, I don't even know, it's like 15 sex scenes in the novel, and they're so long.
No storyline.
I mean, no criticism. She's great. I love her work, but I was getting to a point where I was like, oh my God, I can't take anymore. Like, I just read about his throbbing member, and 7 pages later, we're back to his throbbing member. But a lot of people loved it because that's what they had, come to expect. And now she's released that the next one will have even more than that, and then we're going into like erotica territory, I think, at this point. So it really depends on what you're okay with and what the readers want in the genre.
We tend to have, we've got into a rhythm. Sorry, everything just sounds like an innuendo, whatever I say, but we have got into a rhythm now with our series because we knew from the beginning it was going to be 6 books and 2 to 3 novellas. So we've realized that, to begin with, it's quite clear that she's going to fancy someone, like someone, that there's going to be a relationship. By around about 55-60%, you will have they nearly have sex. So maybe it's a kiss or maybe a bit of foreplay, but it's kind of whetting your appetite, as it were. And then by about 75-80%, just as the story itself is building up to its story climax, then we give them the sex.
The definition of the erotica genre is that the plot revolves around the erotic element. So for us, you could take it out. We wouldn't take it out because of the genre, but then we also are not going to do it. Like, we're not going to have 30% of the book be that, because it would be too much and people would start to want to skip through it.
And each book's a crime solving whodunit anyway. So we really have made our lives quite complicated because we just wrote a whodunit and a romance, and every single book's in a different country in a different language. But yeah, so they're there for more than just the sex.
Excellent. This is kind of related to pace and tempo. Rhoda Baxter says, any tips on how to increase tension leading up to a sex scene? So that's something as well, because, again, if you're talking about thrillers, if you're talking comedy, all of these things have something in common, which is you have a kind of a tension and then a release, and quite literally sometimes in sex scenes. So is that something you're very aware of as well, creating that sort of tension?
It's vital. Without it, people are going to skip the sex scene because they haven't had the build up. I mean, it's no different to, I don't know, trying to woo someone in real life, or when you like somebody, you're going to start off with noticing them, then the eye contact, then maybe their fingers brush, or they do something that makes you like them. Then, of course, you're going to put some barriers in the way, and you're going to make the reader go, oh my God, are they going to get together or are they not? And that's how you build desire and tension and need and want and all of that. And then you have them have some kind of contact but not be satisfied. So they're left unsatisfied, therefore the readers are left unsatisfied, which makes them want to keep turning the page. And by the time they get round to having sex, you want the readers to be just as desperate for them too as the characters are. And you want to leave them satisfied. There's nothing worse than reading a book or watching a movie where it's like, will they, won't they, will they, won't, and it fades to black and you're left like, come on, I want to see what it was like for them, especially if their characters are so well drawn that you want to know what they would be like in bed together. Would it work? Would it not? Is it awkward? Is it funny? Is it sexy? Is it wild? You want to see it.
Absolutely. Lucy Masters has a question. She says, I've started my own erotic dictionary, picking up words and phrases as I come across them. What 3 other resources would you recommend as a tool kit for the novice embarking on a first series of erotic novellas? So again, this kind of comes back to language, words and phrases. Do you sort of cherry pick phrases as they come along, or is there a sort of a word bank that you go to use every now and then, or are you constantly on the lookout? Does the language evolve? Do you pick up on new phrases as the genre evolves?
I think I read probably more romance than Natalie. Natalie reads a lot of upmarket. Is it called upmarket?
So no, you're making me sound very literary. I read a lot because I write fantasy in my own name. I read a lot of fantasy and speculative fiction. But I think you read much more kind of.
Yeah, I read a lot more romance. So if I notice words, I'll be like, oh yeah, that one works. Putting that, for shelving that for later. And I think that's a really good quick way. So purchase a few of those novellas on Kindle. Like if you're already writing erotic novellas, just purchase a couple, like usually 99 cents and stuff. And then look at those scenes and, you can pick whichever ones you like. Then we use Pinterest. So we type in list of terms into Pinterest and many different cute pins will come up that are easy to use. And Emotional Thesaurus, I think that book, there's like many versions of it, right? Of the Emotional Thesaurus.
So the more you write and the more you read, you're going to just pick up on it much more organically. Nobody wants it too forced,
I definitely personally need all the tools because I'm one of those people, I can think up like a million worlds, but then when I sit down in front of the laptop, I'm like, what's that thing on your leg? And then it's like 10 minutes later, a knee. Okay, great. Like this, So I definitely need a few anatomy pins open on Pinterest and a couple terms open and stuff because they just, if I'm sitting in front of the laptop, they won't like organically, into my.
We work to each other's strengths though, because Jackie's an absolutely amazing at tight storytelling. I mean, her beats are so tight, her plot, her complicated structures and the red herrings and all the foreshadowing, fantastic. But you hate the action scenes, you hate the pacing, you hate the kind of flowery description. So very often she'll send me her chapter and it might only be, I don't know, 500 words or something. It's like, Natalie, just describe the scenery. Natalie, I don't know what they're wearing. And then I'm like, just give me 600 words to talk about how beautiful the sky is. I'm
a visual thinker and the words don't come into my head. So right now we're doing, I don't think it's a big secret, but we're doing like a Christmassy winter special surprise thing. And I was literally like, okay, snow, that's all I got, snow. So I had to like pull up a bunch of like lists of Nordic terms and lists of Christmas terms because my brain was going like, I'm like snowy landscape and that's it. My brain is not going into the words. Some authors obviously sit down and it's like this type of tree and this type of, see, even right now it's not coming. So there's so
wind feel against your cold cheek, Jackie, and then she'll be like, Natalie, they're in a forest. Stuff happens. Just talk about what the trees look like.
I mean, the wind whips for sure. Yeah, like I would think of that, but there are literally authors that will sit down and when they think of a landscape, they're thinking types of trees, types of vehicles. That's all coming right into their head. I need little guidelines for that. So Pinterest is really amazing. I don't know. Probably everyone uses Pinterest in this way, but I would just type in like Christmas words into Pinterest and these like helpful infographic type things come up.
And we have to share a brain with this book. So we'll have to make sure that the Christmassy cottage she's got in her mind is the same as mine. I mean, we were writing Witches of Barcelona and realized that we gave Louisa 2 different hairstyles depending on who wrote that chapter. We were like, both knew her hair was short, but so yeah. Did have a lot of sharing.
Did that answer the question, Mark, or did we?
Yeah, I think it does. No, that's fantastic. That is fantastic. And using Pinterest is a new thing as well. I think that's a really, really good idea, particularly if you have specifics. The emotional dictionaries and things that you described, they're great, but they're quite general. But if you're looking for something specific, then that's terrific. Lucy has a follow-up.
Sorry. The thing is that Pinterest is a marketing tool for people. So now people put their blogs on. So instead of, it's like a mini Google now to get more niche things because you can type in, best romance terms and the results you're going to get on Pinterest is like 10 blogs that talk about romance terms. So you don't have to wade through it on Google. So people don't know that because I think a lot of them think Pinterest is a visual tool, but it's also a search tool for blogs. So I want to put that in.
Very good to know. I shall be updating my Pinterest page immediately after this. Lucy has a follow-up question, which is, what are your top 5 do-nots for sex scenes?
Well, as Jackie was saying, we don't like to judge because people like all sorts of things from their books. For us personally, it's so important for us that we write. I'll say what we do. We need to have consent in our sex scenes, and that doesn't mean are you up for this? Yes, I am, he said. It's not going to be like that. But there's always, he'll lean in, she'll lean back, she'll give a subtle nod, she'll lead him by the hand. For us, it's incredibly important. I know that there's a lot of fantasy and paranormal romances out there where a part of their tropes is the kind of rough taking her whether she likes it or not. We will not do that. That's our massive do not. There's no rape scenes, there's no sexual abuse. It's all very consensual. We also we don't write it from a male gaze. It was quite amusing to us. We watched a movie the other day, and the guy was saying to the woman, and this is what you could have missed out on. And then some other woman's like giving him a blowjob. And I'm thinking, is the other woman he's trying to make really jealous about this scenario? Because it's about his pleasure, not her pleasure. So everything we write, because we're two women writing about women for women, it's written from the male gaze. So we do not leave any of our characters unsatisfied. It's really, really important to us.
I'm just laughing because it has the word job in it. It's like you could have missed out on this labor.
All this hard work for me, not for you. You get nothing out of it. But
we have to do female gaze. We're also not into the whole virgin trope thing, which a lot of people in the subgenres are into. So you get a lot of like the wolf shifter claims the virgin, or claimed by the, and which is fine. No judgment again, because a lot of people do want to consume that and they love that subgenre. And you should be able to seek out the type of literature that you like, which is so great about indie. But for us, we wanted a woman who retains the power more or less, unless she freely wants to give it for fun. So we wanted young, sassy, 25-ish sassy girl who has no problem having a lot of sex for fun because she wants to. And then that's sort of the angle that we went with. And that's been fun. But
it's with people that are part of the storyline that actually progress her growth and part of her arc. So everybody she meets, she kind of benefits, she learns from, she benefits from. These aren't strangers. Some of them are going to come back again in the series. So nothing's kind of there for no reason. It's not gratuitous.
There are a lot of dynamics there at play, but we also wanted to, and this was hard for me, for example, as a romance reader, because you kind of, each person in romance is like, he's my, my ride or die, my one for eternity. And you always get that angle. But we knew she'd be meeting a lot of people and, having a good time.
They can't all be the one.
So yeah, they can't all be, because you get series that try to do that and it just feels forced. It's like, every one of these is my soulmate. So we tried to do more like that she genuinely cares for these different people in different ways, or they intrigue her in different ways. And she feels confident and free enough to engage in that behavior and stuff like that. So I think that was kind of fun because we twisted a little bit of the romancing, because some of our readers I don't understand, the love interest from book one is not in the other books, and it's like, no, we want her to go through this growth, and then there's an ultimate maybe lover, maybe.
Because ultimately there's one if you put all 6 books together, it's one story. So you will see her arc and who she'll end up with at the end, and why she ended up with that, and how she couldn't have got there without all the people she's met in one way or another.
But in regards to, so our do's or don'ts, so going back to the question, is we don't mess with consent. That was really important to us because we're not in those subgenres. We try to do it female dominant, that it's, her gaze, her interests, and things like that. And what else is on it? We had another
empowerment. Yeah, it's quite feminist, non-judgment, no virgins, no violence, no rape. We don't find it sexy, so we don't think our readers are going to find it sexy, and that's what it boils down to, really.
Excellent stuff. Brilliant. Denise Ganley has a question. What questions do you ask yourself about your sex scenes when writing one or during editing? Is there anything you feel is a must-have element in most of your sex scenes?
She has to come away satisfied. I mean, yeah, we like them both to be satisfied, but we're not going to write for women and not give her at least one orgasm. And neither are we going to give her 5, because we don't want anyone to feel like that's also the norm. But, we want to, we need to make sure that it was worth the wait at the end of the day.
We could leave her unsatisfied if it was part of the plot, if we were sort of going towards something. And yeah.
Brilliant stuff.
What was the question again? What we Remind me the question.
Well, that was it. What questions do you ask yourself about sex scenes when writing? And is there a must-have element? I mean, satisfaction is really it, isn't it?
Yeah. So satisfaction, characterization, use of environments. So really talking about where they are, how does that affect them? Characterization, pre-build-up is really important, and sort of post-resolve. I think if you look at the traditional beats of how a story has to unfold, we do that internally in the sex scenes as well. So you've got escalation, that literal climax, and resolution, and all of that. So
we're very beat-driven in everything we do.
Excellent, excellent advice. You mentioned earlier, she has different partners throughout the series, but by the end of it, she will go off with the one, or maybe she will, maybe she won't. I don't want to go into spoiler territory. But again, I remember I was at Orion when Charlene Harris published the last True Blood book, last Suki Stackhouse book, and my God, the 1-star reviews from fans, people were not happy. How do you, again, I don't want to go into spoiler territory, but how do you balance that kind of reader expectation with your own?
Who did you end up with?
We don't know, do we? Do you remember the end? You just don't know who it is.
She's but that's just the show. I was going to ask Mark.
Oh yeah, I haven't read the books actually.
I mean, so you can give me a spoiler for the thing.
I just sold the books. I didn't read them, but I remember I was the
maybe it was left just as ambiguous.
At the time, I was the Amazon account manager, and it was Amazon on publication day was bombarded with 1- and 2-star reviews from angry fans. So it's something I guess you must be aware of, that you've got to satisfy the fans, satisfy the readers, give them what they want, but then not give them what they want. As I mean, this applies to romance as well.
We work with them.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same.
You see it a lot in TV shows, and I always try to analyze why this happens. And I think it's because the writers write themselves into a hole by the final season, because so many shows now where I just, watch the finale, like True Blood or How I Met Your Mother or Dexter, a million shows where you're like, why that Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones, yeah.
I am so unsatisfied. I hate you so much. So I think there is a middle point, I do. We used to see that in YA, didn't we? Where it was like, it was a great series, and then in the end, they're just like, let's have horrible deaths. And it's like, well, I don't like that. I'm not a fan. So.
But we've already decided what happens. And I think that's what it shows when somebody's already decided it, or when the series has done so well on TV or in a book that they just keep adding to it. We knew from book 1 exactly what was going to happen to her. So the beats of each book are individual, and the sex and everything, but also the beats of the entire series also are reflected across all 6 books. We know who she's going to be with. We're not going to tell anybody. And that doesn't also mean that, that's a happy ever after. Who knows? There might be a sequel. But at the end of the day, it has to make sense. Who she ends up with and the resolution has to make sense. And you need to plant that right at the very beginning. And that's why I said to Jackie, it was so important for me that if we were going to write a series like, my trilogy that I wrote under my own name, I knew exactly when I started this trilogy what was going to happen at the end, so that I hope, my 3rd book comes out in July, that nobody's going to be like, oh my God, you didn't give us what we wanted. But at the same time, you don't want to wrap it up too neatly. You want to put the readers through the mill a little bit. You want to make them suffer a little bit. They want that. They're expecting that. But they want to feel like the ending makes sense.
Yeah, our readers are helping us determine as well what they want to happen. So I think that's a bit different than other series. So I don't imagine, hopefully we won't be bombarded by 1-star reviews towards the end. But I also think that you can put your reader through the ringer, which is necessary, without completely breaking their heart for no reason.
Yeah.
I'm personally not.
I don't like that.
Yeah,
no, because they've been there in the journey with you. They've been right beside your main character the whole way through. Why are you going to upset them? I don't understand that.
Yeah. You need to reward your reader and not cheat them, which is easier said than done. But okay, final question. Rob Gibson asks, "Where do babies come from?" Oh, Rob. Oh.
What were the words? Pleasure canals and honey pots.
Honey pots and pleasure canals. That's where they come from.
Yeah, Rob's got a lot to learn, I think.
Jacqueline, should read our books. There's no
Natalie,
babies.
Yes, they should. Well, look, where can folks find you online?
Amazon. That's the best place at the moment because we publish through Amazon. So we're on Kindle, we're on Audible, and we're on paperback. So I don't know if this is going to be on screen as well, but I'll hold it up anyway.
I have them too. I don't even know if they're going to be on the screen, but
I don't know, but we're going to hold them up for you, Mark, to look at anyway.
We do
and shout out to Jackie, who does our covers, because she's
I did the covers.
Very humble about that.
Fantastic.
We do have really nice paperbacks that you can get on Amazon. We're still going to be exclusive with them till probably next year. We're coming hopefully to more countries this year as well, so we'll see about that. We've got audio on Audible, and you can see a sample. Our narrator is amazing. We love her. And you can find us on mostly Instagram for fun visual stuff, and then on Twitter. Natalie runs the Twitter.
Yeah, and CaedisKnight.com. Everything's from there. It's probably the easiest. Just go on our website. All the links are there.
Join our newsletter for freebies, or look into our street team if you want to actually actively help craft the stories and stuff, if that's someone's thing.
Actually,
on our site.
Let's talk about, folks, we'll put links in the show notes below so you can find all of those nice and easily. Let's talk about the street team thing, because again, this is always fascinating. Where did this come from, and how does it work?
Well, I think it's actually quite a kind of young adult thing, and Jackie and I started out writing YA. So a lot of what we do, even though our books are not for teens, we have adopted a lot of things that work there. And I had a street team. Jackie had a street team for her trilogy as well. And my background's marketing. So I've been, how old am I now? 20 odd years working in marketing. And focus groups have always been the way to understand your brand and to build your products. So I personally love the idea of working with a small team of people that really have your back, that understand what it is you do, who love the fact that they have the opportunity to work closely with the author and help build a series. And they're our sounding board. And to be honest, I couldn't have done my own trilogy without my team. We've now whittled it down to like 6 of us, and we nearly talk every single day, and they're amazing. And they've been by my side since the very, very beginning. And Jackie and I have built the Verity Nights for our Caedis Knight series. And you get a special pass, a number and group, and we do competitions, and sometimes they can appear in the book, and or they might get a little prize, and we try to reward them for their input and their help. And in exchange,
the idea is it's people who already love the books, I think, hopefully, and they go out and they shout about us in these, in these personal ways and stuff, and it helps us. And then in return, we try to provide value and fun, a place where they can have direct access to us, whether that's writing tips and stuff like that, because we're starting to teach now. Or access to the story. So one of the latest things we've done is we're doing a Christmas special, and we want to include personal memories of everyone in our street team as Easter eggs in the books. So we're like, give us, a special moment from your life so we can weave it into Easter eggs for you to find in the Christmas special. People, they were really excited about that, I think.
Fantastic.
And it's lovely for us to put in these little personal touches. It feels like we're connecting directly with our readers, because as Jackie said, that's why we wrote together. It can be such a lonely business, but when you build this rapport and you bring people along on your journey, they want to keep supporting you all the way
it has
through.
To be a two-way street. They care about you, and then you care about them in return, and create this really nice kind of dynamic.
Wonderful stuff. Sounds absolutely amazing. Well, Natalie and Jacqueline, thank you so much for answering all our questions today. It was absolutely cracking stuff. And folks, do seek out the Blood Web Chronicles and find them online. Like I said, all the links are below. And great speaking to you both. And until next time, happy writing. Hope to speak to you both again.
Thank you so much.